Just a week ago, exactly a week ago, we were talking in terms of the United States demanding an immediate ceasefire from Russia in Ukraine, or else there'd be crippling sanctions. And here we are a week later with Putin apparently being rewarded with a summit, a high-level summit, bilateral summit in Alaska with the United States president. And there's not much evidence of a ceasefire across the front. The front itself is 1,000 kilometres, 600 miles. There's been fighting all the way along the front. And this week, the Russians conducted a pretty effective surprise offensive in the Donbass area. It probably won't amount to too much because I don't think they can back it up very well. And the Ukrainians are bringing in reserves to stem that particular offensive. But the offensive itself shows that the Russians are serious about proving that they can take more and more territory if they keep fighting. And that's what this is all about. The Western world, the United States, have said, we want an immediate ceasefire. Zelensky agreed to that back in March. And then, if we have an immediate ceasefire, we can talk about the issues that need to be sorted out. Whereas the Russians say, no, we've got to talk about all of those issues, we've got to agree those difficult issues, and then there will be a ceasefire. And, of course, that's just a way of putting off a ceasefire, of creating conditions before we can have a ceasefire, because the Russians don't want a ceasefire. They think that they're winning. They think that if they keep on going, they'll get more and more territory, and only when they've got a lot more territory in the whole of the Donbass, this area that they haven't yet conquered, will they really think about a ceasefire. That's the dynamic of what's going on the ground. Behind that, the Europeans are really worried. They're worried, of course, as Dominic was saying, that this may constitute a sellout in Alaska with neither them nor Ukraine critically at the table. They talk about the infamous Munich conference of 1938, where Britain, France and Germany carved up Czechoslovakia without Czechoslovakia even being in the room. And that was a dishonourable and disastrous treaty which did a lot to create the conditions which led to the Second World War just a year later. And so the Europeans really worry about that. And behind that are two different dynamics. The dynamic of the Russians is that when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed into 15 different successor states, of which Russia was one and Ukraine was another. So the Soviet Union became 15 different countries in Europe, in Central Europe itself, in the eastern part of the Black Sea, and right through to the Asia and the Stans and so on. And the Russians have never accepted that. And they blame Ukraine more than anyone else for precipitating that breakup. That's not true, but it's what they think. The Europeans, on the other hand, they see these successor states as something that are a force for good in a new world. But they worry now that the Russians have crossed a Rubicon. In 2022, Putin actually did something that he hadn't done before. He set up a full invasion, and the Europeans worry that this is an attempt, which Putin talks about all the time, of recreating something close to the old Soviet empire. And that dynamic means that there's no way back for Russia after 2022, and there's no way back for Europe after 2022. The United States doesn't see it that way. They see Ukraine as a war they want to get out of. The Europeans increasingly see Ukraine as a war that they have to prevail in. Two different dynamics, two different ways of looking at it within the NATO alliance. And that's a historic difference of opinion about the nature of the world and the nature of European security. And the fear is that Alaska will take a big step down that road of divergence between Washington and the European capitals. We'll see.